I mean, given the complexity about the first quarter GDP and what lies ahead, I'm just wondering what your intuition tells you about the underlying direction of the economy right now. Many of your colleagues have said they feel growth is slowing. If so, do you have any sense of by how much, to what degree the slowdown may be? What does your gut tell you about how things are evolving out there?
My gut tells me that uncertainty about the path of the economy is extremely elevated, and that the downside risks have increased. The risk is, as we pointed out in our statement, the risks of higher unemployment and higher inflation have risen, but they haven't materialized yet. They're not really in the data yet. So that tells me more than by intuition, because I think it's obvious actually that the right thing for us to do is we're in a good place. Our policy's in a very good place, and the right thing to do is await further clarity. And there's usually things clarify and the appropriate direction becomes clear. That's what usually happens. Right now, it's very hard to say what that would be. In the meantime, the economy is doing fine. Our policy isn't, it's not highly restrictive. It's somewhat restrictive. It's 100 basis points less restrictive than it was in last summer. So we think it's in a good place, and we think the appropriate thing is for us to wait and see and get more clarity about the direction of the economy.
Well, let me press you on this idea of the economy being fine right now, because reading the Beige Book very closely the last time around, there was a lot of negative stuff, negative sentiment that was in there. And I know that everybody's looking at soft data right now. You mentioned it yourself that the sentiment's sour. But the Beige Book was talking about, the beginnings of layoffs in some industries, prices rising in some places, and an awful lot of investment decisions being pushed to the sideline. Doesn't that point to a slowdown?
It may well. It just hasn't shown up yet. And we all look at all these sentiment and read many individual comments just to get a better feel. And businesses and households very broadly are concerned and postponing economic decisions of various kinds. And yes, if that continues and nothing happens to sort of alleviate those concerns, then you would expect that to begin to show up in economic data. It wouldn't maybe show up overnight, but it would show up over weeks and months. And that may be what happens, but it hasn't happened yet. And also, there are things that can happen that will change that narrative. I mean, they haven't happened, but it's possible to imagine things that. But in the meantime, yes, we're watching it extremely carefully, like everyone is, but don't see really much evidence of it in the actual economic data yet. And by the way, consumers keep spending, credit card spending. It's still a healthy economy, albeit one that is shrouded in very downward sentiment on the part of people and businesses.
Michael McKee from Bloomberg Radio and Television. The Fed's been criticized recently by a former governor for what he calls mission creep. You take on more problems, use more tools, and then end up building tools to deal with the fallout of those tools, which then makes it a given that you will act more aggressively in the future. Is that a fair critique, and is that something you would be looking at in your framework review?
Sorry, say the critique again.
That the Fed has been involved in mission creep, gets involved in using too many new tools to deal with problems and to go too far. Is that something that the critique was based around the fact that you did QE and QE and QE and went beyond the narrow confines of your mandate?
So, well, I mean, there are a couple. That's not really beyond the confines of our mandate. I would say this: we did things. Essentially, we're on an emergency footing for a couple of years in the pandemic, and it's very fair and very welcome for people to look back over what we did and say, hey, you could have done this better and different. And one thing we hear a lot is we could have explained QE a little better. We did think we were explaining it in real time. I completely accept the thought that we could have explained it better. There's a lot of thinking that we went on too long with QE. I can tell you that the reason we did was we were concerned that we didn't want a tightening, a sharp tightening of financial conditions at a time when we thought the economy was still vulnerable. And so we did hold on for a long time to